Hello friends, and welcome back to the Hall of Craft! So for a long time there's been a big gap in my terrain arsenal, and that's ruins. I've been putting a lot of thought recently into how I want to fill that gap, and I came up with 3 criteria. The first is that I want them to be modular. Like everything I have, I need it to be modular because I don't have a lot of storage space to store these big one-time use pieces, so I need to get a lot of mileage out of all my stuff. The second piece of criteria is that I want it to be original. Black Magic Craft, Jeremy, has a really awesome video on runes, which I can link in the top right, and I thought for a while that I was gonna probably end up just doing that build, but I decided against it because that's not original and I want to come up with something that's unique to me, and just copying his runes would not be kind of content that I could share with you guys, so I wanted to try and push myself to come up with something different. The third thing that I wanted to have for these ruins is that I wanted them to absolutely not have a base. I want to be able to throw these on a board and have it work, and I want to be able to throw them next to my tiles and have them work as walls. So putting them on a base, no bueno. Do not want to do that. And then I got this, a massive pile of foam core from my office. The only catch was that I needed to peel the outdated artwork off of the one side because they were using them for signage before. So, very worth it if you ask me. All I had to do was just peel off one side, and I was probably gonna have to peel off the paper anyway. So that decided it for me. I'm making modular ruins out of only foam core, an Xacto blade, and hot glue. No excuses, this is a very entry-level build, so let's just jump right into it. So to start this out, I'm gonna peel the paper off both sides. With cheap foam core that you can get at the dollar store, this is extremely easy. Unfortunately for me, this is not cheap foam core, so the paper is actually glued on with a very strong adhesive, and I struggled quite a bit to peel it off. One technique that I accidentally discovered while doing this is that you can crack the foam core in half, breaking it down the middle, but just bending the paper, so the foam cracks and the paper bends. This gives you really good leverage to pull the paper off because you don't have to pick at it from the corner and hope that it doesn't rip. You have this really strong line down the middle that you can put pressure on to peel the paper off without ripping or tearing it. The only downside here is that you ruin a little bit of the foam core, but as you saw, I have a giant pile of it, so I'm really not concerned with a little bit of waste. So once I have a good pile of foam core ready to go, I'm gonna grab a mini for scale, my circle template, and a couple pieces of printer paper. I'm going to use these to create a template for a couple of different sized archways for my ruins. The plan here is that I'm going to take a pencil and start drawing out wall segments for my ruins. These will all be 5 inches tall by 6 or 3 inches wide. This is because my tiles are 3 inches, and I want them to line up fairly decently with that. Now I know what you're gonna say, 5 inches tall? That's insane, my players will never be able to see over that. Well, shh, it's gonna be okay. I have a solution for this, just trust the system, it's all gonna be okay. So back to the action, I'm tracing out the areas and then using my template to add the archways and cutting them out with my Xacto knife. These more complicated pieces will be corners, and I plan on gluing them together so that they can hold themselves up without any supports.
You scare me. It's the ocean in your eyes. You know me. For the life of me, I don't know why. Placed in bed.
For this main archway, I want it to have a big elaborate doorway. So I'm going to draw the bricks around it, and then on a separate piece of foam core, cut it out and duplicate it. Once they are cut out, I'm going to use my hot glue gun to attach them to the main wall piece. I'm going to use a similar technique to add extra detail to the smaller archways. I'll take one of the archway cutouts and then trace it on a piece of foam. Then make it about a 1/4 inch thicker and cut it out, attaching it to the archway with a similar fashion of hot glue. Since I have many archways, I'll be cutting out a bunch here and then attaching them all the same way. Once I'm finished with those details, I'm going to attach my corners together with more hot glue. These corners are nice, but they're a little flimsy. So I'm going to cut out some more 1/2 inch by 5 inch pieces of foam to make a corner pillar piece. Before I attach them to the corner, I'm going to slightly bevel the edge so that they fit together nicely. I'm just going to take this chance to draw my brick pattern onto the walls. For this I'm just winging it without using precise measurements. If you want these to line up perfectly, you can get out a ruler and make sure that everything is exact, but I personally don't find the juice worth the squeeze on that step. So I just eyeball it and do my best to make sure it's decent. Is it perfect? No, but I think the final result looks just fine, and it took much less time than drawing the grid. Just make sure that you alternate your bricks either way, so that the ends don't line up with the line of bricks below it. Once the brick pattern is done, I'm going to glue on the corner pieces. That helps strengthen the piece quite a lot. Since I'm mostly just winging this build, the corner pieces were mostly a proof of concept. So now that I'm happy with them, I'm going to start rolling it out onto the other sections. To go along with those, I'm going to need some straight length walls. These will also be 5 inches tall and 3 inches or 6 inches long. I'm going to cut these out and then draw on my brick patterns. This step took quite a while, and I started experimenting with the best way to actually get the brick pattern onto it. Here's the juice. The fastest way I found to get the bricks on, without using some kind of roller, is to take my sharpened kitchen knife and lightly roll it along the surface of the foam, guaranteeing straight lines and a semi-consistent spacing. Then I take out my pencil and I trace over those lines and carry them over onto the back. Then I just draw on the vertical lines like normal, and that's it. Let me know in the comments if this method helps you or if you have a better one. So once all my bricks are traced out, I'm going to add some more details to these flat walls. The easiest way to do this is to take some of the archway cutouts I have from making the corner pieces and glue them into place on the flat walls, making sure to flip the walls over and have the archways line up perfectly with each other. This is important for a later step. These archways make the walls look quite a bit more interesting, and they also strengthen them up quite a bit by making them more thick. Really happy with how that turned out. I'm actually going to use 2 of these segments to create a couple more short corners as well, so 2 3-inch sections to make a corner piece, copying the same techniques as I had used on my other corner pieces. Now that I have all the walls done, I bet you're wondering how I'm going to make them stand, because I said before that I was not going to have any bases. Well, I'll get to that in a second. First, I'm going to add some caps to the top of my corner pieces. So here it is. I'm going to draw a bunch of 3-inch by 2-inch triangles onto separate pieces of foam. Then I'm going to draw twice as many 2.5 by 1.5 inch triangles, and I'm going to cut them all out with a sharp blade. I'm keeping my blade sharp by using my Kershaw knife sharpener instead of swapping the blade out. I highly recommend getting one of these for yourself. I'll throw a link in the description to Amazon. Now that they're all cut out, I'm going to start gluing them together. 2 small triangles on either side of a large triangle. These are going to be really simple wall trusses for the straight pieces. So this would have been the perfect time to get a tinfoil ball and roll it along all my pieces to do the stone texture. Unfortunately for me, I got excited that this was starting to come together and look like something, and I forgot about it until later in the build. But if you're following along, do it at this point, when everything is flat. So here I go, blasting forward, gluing on the trusses without a care in the world. 1 truss per small segment and 2 for a large one. I'm using the table to make sure that I'm getting a good 90-degree angle because I want these to be nice and straight. One other thing to note here, my hot glue gun is on low temp. A high temp would be too hot for the thin foam core and melt right through it. It will also make it take much longer to cool down and get a secure connection. To make sure that I have a really solid connection for these pieces, I'm going to place them out onto a new piece of foam core and trace their footprint. Then I'm going to cut them out and glue them to the bottom of each piece. I'm being a little rough with the initial cutout here, but after they're glued on, I'm going to take my knife and cut off the excess. This really helps keep the pieces stable, especially the pieces that have the archways. Now that that's done, I'm going to remember that I wanted to tinfoil ball these, and I'm going to carefully do that, pressing it and rolling it along all of the surfaces in order to give a stone texture. This really does wonder for all of the flat surfaces especially.
Just let these time escape. Just let this fire fade. We're off for retreating. A chance for
Now here's the fun part. It's also the part that's going to put your height fears at ease. So far we've done a great job creating some perfectly intact walls, but I told you at the beginning we were creating ruins. So I'm going to take out a marker and I'm going to mark 2 inches high at the edges of all of my walls. Now I'm going to grab a big old pair of pliers and attack these things like time is attacking the bags under my eyes. Making sure to consider 2 things while I do this. The first is to line up with the lines that I have drawn for the bricks. The creases actually help you get a nice clean rip, and I don't want to rip too many bricks in half. The second is that I want all of the walls to meet up around that 2-inch mark at the side so that they can be totally modular and line up nicely. The height in the middle can vary as much as you want, but it's just important that you meet that 2-inch at the sides so that all of the walls look like they're meant to be together. This step is actually super fun. It's also the step where they actually start looking like ruins, and it's incredibly satisfying. On some of the pieces, I'm also going to use my fingernails to draw in some crack lines. I'm also going to bend and pull some pieces with my fingers to try and make it look like it's leaning or falling over a little bit. I'm going to use the pliers to put some nicks into the trusses, and I'm also going to grab a knife and cut out some select bricks to add a little bit more detail. For this piece with the 3 archways, I really want one of the archways to be broken, so I just ripped it up. This actually made it pretty flimsy, but I liked the way that it looked quite a bit, so to salvage it, I cut a straight length of paperclip and placed it inside the bottom piece of foam core to help hold it together and add some more support. Then I just clipped off the excess. This worked pretty well. Now it's time to base coat these. This step's really important for this build in particular. I'm going to use a black magic base coat. Link in the top right if you're unfamiliar. This is important because it's basically black paint and Mod Podge mixed together, and you completely coat all of the pieces in it. This gets in all the nooks and crannies and it dries really solid, helping hold all of the pieces together. The other wonderful thing about this is that it actually gets absorbed into the foam itself, and it dries to give it this really nice shell that takes paint extremely well. So I'm just going to mix those 2 things together in my old salsa jar, and then grab a brush and coat all of my pieces, placing them on a retired baking sheet to dry off so that they don't stick to my table when they're dry. Here's what those look like dry. As you can see, it has made them significantly more rigid, and they're still a little fragile because they're thin foam, but they are so much more sturdy than they were before, and they're more than good enough for my table. Now it's time to paint. My favorite way to do stone is to grab my dollar store makeup brushes and overbrush the crap out of them. Starting with gray, right onto the black base coat, mostly from a top-down angle to simulate natural lighting. Then I'm going to use a light taupe. This has a much warmer undertone to it, and it will help add some color differentiation to the ruins. I'm going to be a lot more sparing with this and just sporadically hit the pieces. Definitely not going for 100% coverage. After that, I'm going to use a suede, which is a really nice highlight for the stone. I'm going to dry brush this onto the top halves of my pieces, focusing mostly on the highlight areas. I am also not cleaning my brush in between these colors. This helps the transition, and it saves me a little bit of dish soap. The last thing I'm going to do is use some vanilla, and very sparingly apply it onto the tops and edges of my pieces. This is a little bit overboard and goes a little bit too bright, but the step right after this will bring it back down to the color that I actually want it to be. Okay, so for that aforementioned next step, the wash. I am going to just take my homemade black wash, which is a mix of matte medium, black and brown inks, flow improver, and water, and I'm going to pour it directly out of the container onto my ruins. I'm going to take my brush and then start spreading it around afterwards. Once I'm happy with the coverage, I'm going to set it on my baking sheet. Make sure to stand these up straight so that gravity helps you by pulling any excess wash down to the bottom of the ruins.
It's the ocean in your eyes.
So here's what these look like dry. I'm super happy with how these turned out. They have a great amount of detail, but they weren't a crazy amount of work. At this point, to add some more to them, you could use some glue to add some flocking, or use a green wash and let it drip into the cracks, and that'll add a little bit more detail. For my case, I'm not going to do that because I want these to be modular and able to be used in any situation, and adding moss or flocking to it would make them look kind of absurd in a desert or Arctic setting, two settings which I kind of plan on using them in. So I'm going to skip that step, but if you're following along, feel free. Modular foam core ruins, that's it. Easy to make, easy to use, and it's all using cheap materials that aren't going to break the bank. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, I have plenty of other crafting and painting videos that you could check out. I'll see you guys in my next one. Have a great week.